Ever try to uh, navigate a city you've just never been to before?
Hmm.
It's kind of disorienting, right? Like all these new sights and sounds, and maybe even a whole different language to figure out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Well, that feeling, that's kind of what we're diving into today. This idea that some of us are kind of born into a world that already makes sense.
Hmm.
We've got the lay of the land,
Right.
while others are kind of handed a map that barely makes sense. And we're talking about privilege.
Hmm.
And no, not the private island kind of
Yeah.
privilege. We're going way deeper than that, like way deeper.
Okay.
We're going to unpack how unseen advantages, based on things like race or gender, even being able-bodied,
Right.
can really shape our entire experience in the world.
Yeah.
And the guidebook for this for this deep dive, it's an article called Article 81 White Privilege PDF.
Okay.
So get ready to maybe challenge some assumptions as we unpack this idea, this concept of privilege.
Yes, it's a big one.
Yeah, and it's often misunderstood.
Yeah.
Okay, so the article, it dives right in, right? It says that some people, they just get this unearned head start in life
Hmm.
simply because of who they are. It's not about what they've done, it's about who they are.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about this is how the article argues that it's not always about like individual prejudice.
Yeah.
It's not always about someone trying to like actively hold others back. It's often about the systems in place that are just inherently tilted in favor of the dominant group.
So it's less about individual bad actors, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And more about like the structure of the entire playing field itself.
Exactly. Think of it like imagine a world, right, that's built entirely for people who are right-handed.
Oh.
Everything from doorknobs to scissors to desks to kitchen tools, every single thing
Wow.
designed with them in mind.
Okay.
And now imagine being left-handed in that world, right? No one's like actively discriminating against you, right? But just the system itself is putting you at a disadvantage.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's not that someone's being intentionally malicious.
Yeah.
It's just that the system wasn't designed with you in mind.
Exactly.
And the article actually gives an example along those lines, but it focuses on able-bodied privilege.
Absolutely. Things like stairs, narrow doorways, inaccessible transportation.
Right.
They disadvantage people with disabilities, not out of malice, but just because they weren't considered in the design. Like
Yeah.
that's systemic bias in action. It's the system itself, not individuals, that's creating the disadvantage.
So we're talking about something that's like deeply ingrained
Hmm.
in the very fabric of how society is structured.
Yeah.
But how do different political viewpoints interpret this whole idea
Yeah.
of systemic advantage?
Yeah.
Because the article, it spends some time on the different viewpoints on this.
It's really interesting. The article talks about how liberals and conservatives both view this inherent inequality, right?
Okay.
And liberals tend to see it as this problem to be solved, right?
Mhm.
Something that we need to actively dismantle and correct. Conservatives, on the other hand, they view it more as a natural consequence of individual choices and freedom.
Wait, hold on a second. Because the article mentions something called classical liberals. What exactly does that term mean?
Ah, yes, yes. It can be a bit confusing.
Yeah.
Essentially, a lot of people who identify as conservative, they identify more with this term classical liberal. And it emphasizes this really strong belief in individual liberty and limited government.
Yeah.
So they would argue that if you guarantee political and economic freedom,
Right.
things like free markets and equal opportunity, then true equality will naturally follow from that.
So they believe in creating a level playing field, but maybe disagree on what level actually means.
Precisely.
Or how to get there.
Exactly. And liberals, while also supporting individual freedom, right?
Yeah.
They believe that achieving true equality, it requires more than just equal opportunity.
Okay.
They argue that we need more active measures, things like affirmative action,
Right.
or social safety nets,
Okay.
to kind of counterbalance the systemic disadvantages that certain groups face.
So two sides of the same coin in a way.
Hmm.
Both valuing freedom but disagreeing on the role of government in addressing this inequality.
Exactly.
But let's bring this back to privilege specifically.
Okay.
The article, it dives into a particular theory that's been getting a lot of attention lately. Critical race theory or CRT.
Yes, and this is where things get even more nuanced and often more controversial.
So CRT, it's like we're shining a spotlight on this whole privilege thing, but through a very specific lens, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at how race plays into all of this.
Yeah. Exactly. The article really digs into how folks who support CRT, they're arguing that Western societies, that maybe not always intentionally, but they're structured in a way that benefits white people.
Okay.
And disadvantages people of color. It's about acknowledging those historical systems like colonialism, slavery.
Yeah.
These things cast long shadows, right?
Yeah.
Creating these power imbalances that we're still dealing with.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty heavy historical baggage here.
Yeah.
But then the article it throws in this kind of curveball.
Okay.
It points out that some minority groups, right, like Jewish people or East Asian people, they've seen incredible success in these same Western societies.
Right.
So how does that fit in, right?
Yeah.
If we're talking about systemic disadvantage,
Yeah.
but then you have these groups that have thrived.
That is where it gets really, really interesting. The article argues that it's not just about race.
Okay.
It's about aligning with the dominant culture's values,
Okay.
their traditions, and this is where it gets even more controversial,
Okay.
their IQ levels.
Hold on. IQ levels. That feels like a pretty loaded
It is.
and potentially problematic concept to just bring into this.
You are right to be cautious. It's a very, very sensitive topic and a point of major debate.
Right.
The article does acknowledge that.
Okay.
But it's important to remember we're trying to accurately represent what it's saying.
Okay, yeah.
Even the more controversial points, and this is one of them,
Okay.
it suggests that because intelligence testing, right,
right.
it often has cultural biases built in,
Okay.
that the groups that are already aligned with the dominant culture might just inherently do better on those tests,
Okay.
which then further reinforces
Right.
the existing power structures.
Okay, so it's not necessarily saying that some groups are inherently more intelligent. It's more about how we define intelligence and how we measure it.
Exactly.
And how those measurements then have these ripple effects.
And it even goes a bit deeper than that.
Okay.
The article, it touches on this idea that different groups, shaped by their own histories and their environments, they might have developed different strengths, different weaknesses, even over generations.
Okay, so unpack that a bit more for me.
Sure.
What does that mean, like practically speaking?
Oh, okay. Imagine a society that really, really prizes, say, individualism, right?
Okay.
And risk-taking. Groups whose cultural background, kind of fostered those traits might have an easier time thriving in that environment.
Right.
Compared to groups whose traditions maybe emphasize, like community or collective decision-making, for example.
Okay.
It's not that one set of traits is better.
Right.
It's how they line up with the dominant culture.
Right. It's about the context.
Exactly.
It's like you're given a different set of tools at birth.
Yeah.
Neither one is better, but one might be more immediately useful depending on the game that's being played.
Exactly. And this leads to this crucial point the article makes.
Okay.
That just focusing on inherent equality,
right,
which is a noble goal,
right,
it might actually make us miss those really real systemic disadvantages that certain groups face.
Okay.
To explain the disparities that we see, we have to then rely only on individual prejudice.
Right.
And discrimination, which definitely exists, but it might not be the whole story.
It's like assuming everyone's playing the same game with the same rules, when in reality, the rule book's completely different depending on who you are.
Exactly. And that can lead to so many misunderstandings and misinterpretations
about why these disparities exist in the first place.
Yeah.
So if it's not some deliberate scheme, right? Like the article's saying, it's not some intentional keep certain people down type thing.
Right.
Then what is white privilege really about?
The article says it's less of a malicious plot.
Okay.
And more like inheriting a house your ancestors built.
Okay.
It's the benefit, often unconscious, of generations shaping a society that that caters to their specific needs,
Okay.
to their values.
So it's like you didn't build the house,
Right.
but you get to live in it.
Exactly.
You get to benefit from the layout, from the location.
Right.
Maybe there's even a stash of cash hidden in the walls somewhere.
Right, exactly.
And those who didn't inherit, well, they're starting at a disadvantage.
It's a very good analogy. It's about recognizing that the systems we navigate today, even the ones that seem totally neutral, they're often built on foundations that were laid a long time ago.
Yeah.
And those foundations weren't always level.
It's almost like, you know how you inherit a language?
Mm-hmm.
You grow up speaking the dominant language. You understand it, the nuances, the slang,
Yeah.
the unspoken rules.
Yeah.
But for someone coming from a different language background,
Right.
it's a lot of work just to be understood.
Absolutely. And that's where this whole conversation gets really interesting, I think.
Okay.
The article, it challenges us to think about, like, is it realistic
Okay.
to expect every society to just cater to every individual's needs
Okay.
without them having to adapt at all
Right.
or integrate? Is that really fair to expect?
It's complicated,
It
right?
is,
So there's
yeah.
no easy answers here.
Yeah.
Like the article said, you wouldn't expect special treatment if you went to a foreign country.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
You'd adapt. You'd learn the customs.
Yeah, you don't just assume everyone's going to cater to you.
Right. But then it makes you wonder, like, who gets to decide what adapting even looks like?
Right.
Right. And how much are we asking people to give up
Yeah.
of their own background, their own culture, just to fit in?
It's about finding that balance, I think,
Right.
between acknowledging that these systems exist,
Mhm.
but also striving for a future that's more equitable.
Yeah.
Recognizing that just because you have equal opportunity doesn't mean you're going to have equal outcomes.
Right.
And that history, it plays a part. It matters.
Yeah, for sure. Lots to unpack here.
Different.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
We talked about that difference between, like individual prejudice versus these bigger systems of advantage.
Yeah.
We dug into how culture and history, they're all tangled up with this idea of privilege.
Yeah.
And we even got into some of those more controversial ideas about differences between groups.
But it's complex stuff.
It is. And
Yeah.
and I think the big takeaway here is that this is really just the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, this is like just scratching the surface.
Exactly. There's so much more. There's so much out there. Research, different schools of thought about all of this.
Absolutely.
And it's really up to each of us to kind of keep exploring,
Yeah.
keep learning.
And keep having these conversations.
Exactly. Yeah. And so on that note, I want to leave everyone with this one final thought.
Okay.
If privilege really is about inheriting, right? Inheriting the benefits, inheriting maybe even the burdens of the choices our ancestors made,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean for the world we're building right now?
That's a big question.
Yeah, what are we passing down? Are we creating advantages for some, disadvantages for others? And are we just renovating that old house we inherited, the one with a weird layout and the cash in the walls, or are we building something totally new, something better? It's something to think about.